becoming involved in disaster recovery? What are the key things to keep in mind as we're trying to work with a utility or a disaster agency?
Well, I think Shati hit on one of those. So storage certainly is one of the pieces, I think, of the renewable picture that brings even more value to the disaster recovery scenario, is that if it's a source that you can match your renewable component with that storage component, then you certainly have the ability during the daylight hours following a disaster, your need for your electricity sometimes can be managed and can be much less, but you get into those evening hours and having that pairing of renewable producing and then being available, especially when it comes to solar. Wind is a little bit different in that it's typically going to be available at night in most areas of the country that have wind. So I think that would be one thing to consider, is how to get that pairing going and be a marketable product. I think the other piece is certainly, both the permanent installation, but I would think there's another market that is about the portable temporary setups as well. Is that I think that, we could look at the strategy for developing the same way that we do disaster planning and mutual response to other regions that are hit by major problems. I would think the renewable industry might have some opportunity there. Do we have skid-mounted solar? Do we have, the ability to erect wind turbines on site, these smaller wind turbines, quickly to get them to the regions that are experiencing the problem? A lot of times it's the transmission that's down between your resource and your load. And so is there a niche market there where we can bring to market some of these on-call standby services that we get to feed our crews and, take care of our trucks? Does renewable also have an opportunity in that market? Because there's almost always, unfortunately, a disaster someplace. So to have systems like that available to deploy would be great.
And the transmission portion is important. I remember hearing the story after Hurricane Rita went through that actually it did more damage to the transmission lines than Hurricane Katrina did, and the danger that took place was that Entergy took a hit on its transmission lines that lead to Houston, and Entergy, as I understand it, is the primary energy supplier for the water filtration systems that the city of Houston had. So they had quite a bit of damage and had to do a lot of creative thinking in order to maintain the water system for the city of Houston, which,
important things like that.
Important things.
Greenberg's a good example where if you do have the opportunity, you're building new facilities, why not look? How could I fit that renewable into that mix? Does it have a permanent place into it, as well as perhaps a temporary solution during a disaster?
And some of the other key concepts that really worked well in Greensburg about being disaster resistant. I mean, it is Tornado Alley, and so they really wanted to rebuild to be as bomb-proof as possible. And, they had these two buildings that did survive, right? That they could look at to say, these buildings are tornado shelters, and they survived the biggest tornado we'll ever see. We should rebuild like those. And so we use those buildings as examples. A lot of the new insulation materials and ways to rebuild can be rebuilt in a massive structural way that has a better chance of surviving a tornado. And the passive survivability concepts that were really key to get investments in energy efficiency as well as survivability. And marrying those two was a key move in town to rebuild as efficient as possible.
Are there any questions from the audience that we can entertain at this point? Anyone have any questions or comments or experience that they would like to share?
No.
If not, that's fine. I can keep asking questions.
I have a question potentially.
Go ahead. Ask the audience. Go ahead.
if no one else does. All these backup generators that hospitals and others, they just sit there and run maybe once a month, right? And are kind of this stranded asset. You pay a lot of money for a big generation capacity. To me, it's a lot of the integrated design concepts that I really focus on in building projects is, can you find a value added in energy efficiency? Is there other reasons to do it that that justify an expense in energy efficiency? And so, if you can use your backup generation as also something that provides renewable power when backup's not needed, and marry those two, what are the opportunities there for really getting cost-effective value added from renewable systems that are also able to provide backup and not have another redundant system on top of that you have to invest in? So I've been looking for those types of systems in many situations. The only example I've ever seen as a PV system with batteries, right? And that if you can get rid of a generator in a propane tank, or if you're or a diesel tank, and able to offset that cost with the renewable system that can provide 10% of the total power for the facility on an annual use or annual basis. That to me seems like where we should be going, and where the technologies need to be starting to really be invested in.
Interesting. Any comments from the audience on that? Don't be shy.
That is a great point, because I think that we have requirements, right, for hospitals, nursing homes, and some of those that they have to have that backup life support system. And but you make a really good point, is wouldn't it be great if we could, again, marry that photovoltaic with that storage, and as long as that storage system is charged, that I can also make use of any additional energy that comes out of that photovoltaic system during the day. So, and a lot of times you're required to have 2 generators even. So even if it's leave 1 generator but transition over on a piece of that with solar, it seems like there's opportunity there, and there are other businesses besides hospitals where that's mandatory that could start thinking along that line. It certainly seems like the building codes and rules need to start moving in that direction to enable that technology.
Or even office buildings, or this
those.
building probably has a diesel generator out back, right? It's not the whole load like in a hospital maybe, but there's all these buildings have all the diesel generators, and hotels and
data centers and hotels and all of those who really do have that requirement to have some sustainable facility, right, in terms of sustaining and having power for their emergency systems. It's a great market opportunity, I think, for people to really figure out how to make that work and make it at least, close enough in cost that it becomes a natural choice, or that they've done the business case to show how you offset some other cost, even if it's upfront, first time more expensive.
Absolutely.
Cheryl, how often does a utility like Austin Energy do disaster training or planning or work with all the various agencies and groups that are involved in it to stay fresh and know who's doing what?
We typically locally have at least 1 drill per year where they bring together all the agencies, and we'll do a tabletop exercise to just make sure that everybody stays fresh, stays current, and shares any changes. So we do that locally. We participate with the Texas Mutual Response Group twice a year in planning meetings, and at those meetings, really the biggest topics and the most learning opportunity occurs in what did we do in that last response, and there's a lot of sharing of what we learned, what could we do better next time. And I would think some of these topics might slowly come into play there as we have cities like Austin where we see more and more solar. Might there be some information to share across the region that, wow, we really, saw some good results from this. It let us go focus on something else because we knew that there was some backup generation available within that grid. But we do that twice a year in terms of the mutual response. And of course, disaster planning and recovery, whether that's business continuity or storm response, that's an ongoing, constant process at Austin Energy and probably at most utilities. You've got to constantly be looking at, are we staying fresh, or our call-out list, or our contacts, or our crews, familiar with what the procedures are. That's a constant job. We actually have an emergency management coordinator. That's what they do. They look at business continuity and they look at disaster planning.
Mm-hmm. And that's not unusual to either Austin Energy or to the state of Texas. It's true with most utilities all across the country. All across the country.
Right.
Shanti, what do you? What sorts of federal initiatives are there through DOE to make some of the building code changes